Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Carmina. I'm an astrologer and card reader, and today I have a very exciting guest with us. I have Vic DiCara this way.
Thank you.
Vic DiCara, I'm sure everybody knows him already. He's an astrologer, he's an author, and he's got a wonderful YouTube channel. And I was thinking to invite him so that we can talk about musicians and more generally artists in particular. Recently, I finished writing a study on 375 musicians charts from the Gemini perspective mainly. And with Gemini, we consider the moon the karaka for music, the sun the karaka for singers, and Venus the karaka for entertainment. I watched one of Vic's videos about the artist formerly known as Prince, and I saw that he has like various techniques that he likes to use when looking at a musician's chart, and I was really looking forward for him to explain to us today his way of looking at musicians and at artist charts in general. Welcome again, Vic. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. How is my voice coming through? Okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So you want me to just start talking about
the
way I look at arts and music and stuff like that?
Yeah, I was curious because with Gemini, we look at the moon as the karaka for music, the sun as the karaka for singers, and Venus the karaka for art and entertainment. And I know you also look at Jupiter for sound. I was curious if you look at other grahas for musicians or for artists, you know?
Yeah. Good. Let's talk about that. There's actually, like you just said, there's so many planets that affect music. I think the first place that I would want to look is Venus, the first number one planet, right? Because what created also, and if we create beauty, we're making art. So it presents art, all the arts, including music. So whenever I'm going to think about anything artistic, beautiful, I'm definitely going to keep Venus as the foremost concern. Then I think the number two planet would actually be Jupiter, for the if talking about music, because Jupiter deals with sound. Now, why Jupiter deals with sound is a little more interesting, or a little bit more convoluted. It has to do with the element of the planet. Jupiter's element is ether, and if you're familiar with like the older sciences, the older version of empiric sciences like Sankhya and things, they have each different kinds of element has its type way that it can be perceived. So the way that we perceive ether is through sound. So Jupiter being the planet of ether has a lot to do with sound, and because he's also the planet of wisdom, he has a lot to do with words. You know, we use sounds in the form of words to transmit wisdom and information. So Jupiter, on both of those accounts, has a lot to do with sound in general or words specifically. So, you know, Venus is number one, Jupiter is number two. But it's not that it rules out other planets either. I mean, the moon, right?
Yeah.
The moon is all about timing because she fluctuates all the time. So without the moon, we don't have a sense of rhythm. We don't have a sense of timing. So without that, you can't be a musician either. Maybe there's some Mercury involved too, because Mercury is about communicating things. Would look at. Now, my way of doing astrology isn't really technique oriented, but it's more like principle oriented, where the techniques are very don't need to be very explicitly defined, because the principles allow you to figure out the technique, intuit the technique, right? So if we have our list of artistic planets, we might want to then have a list of artistic signs or artistic houses. And then you got your technique already implied. Well, if I put all these artistic guys together and line them up the right way, houses, signs, and planets, then I have my artist, right? So for artistic houses, this is where it's particularly interesting. Let's save that for last.
Yeah.
Let's do artistic signs. Signs, well, it's just simply speaking, if you have a sign of Venus, then you have an artistic sign, especially Libra, because it's air. Libra is airy, and air is also has dexterity to it and likes kama. Kama is pleasure, and beauty and pleasure are connected. So arts and pleasures are connected. So Libra's pretty powerful. Taurus is also good with art. I would say Libra, you know. Gemini has air and Mercury, so that can also be artistic. So if we maybe put Venus in Libra, Jupiter in Libra, then this is not feather. Here's an artist. Ooh, and then nakshatras. Well, we definitely need to talk about nakshatras, right? This is so interesting too. With nakshatras, you have 6 groups. Six groups of nakshatras. You definitely wouldn't consider like the bitter and things to be artistic. So you want to look towards the nakshatras that are called mridu. Mridu nakshatras are the ones that are very beautiful. So they have a lot to do with arts. The mridu nakshatras are Mrigashirsha, Anuradha, not Rohini, surprisingly. The Rohini is bordering on it. But we should mention Rohini too, just because it's very creative. The symbolism of Rohini is as if it was a mridu nakshatra. It's symbolized by a lady, and it has all kinds of earthy elements to it, like productivity, fertility. So it's so funny what you just said, though.
Why?
Because before you zoomed out, and can I resume?
Yeah, well, Makaraka is Mercury. I am fond of metaphoric speech.
Great. Yeah, so I was talking about the nakshatras that are artistic. You have the mridu nakshatras plus Rohini. The mridu nakshatras are Revati, Chitra, Anuradha, and Mrigashirsha. So you got like 5. Some of the other ones can also have some artistic potential, but those are like the main, very important players, VIPs. There's an interesting thing too. Well, how do the nakshatras overlap with Rashis? We got Chitra is in Libra right now. So if you have a planet like Jupiter or Venus or the moon in Chitra, then you also have that same planet in Libra. So you have 2 counts of artistry. Are you a musician?
I know how to play the bass, and I was in a band shortly.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah.
Do you have anything in Chitra or any of those nakshatras?
No, I don't have anything in Chitra. No, I have the Moon and Saturn in Swati, and I have some planets in Maga, Mula. I have Rahu and Mrigashira.
Okay, Swati, those nakshatras could also be mentioned, the Swati type, the Swati group or the Chala group. Chala group are like air signs. They're good with things that are for pleasure and enjoyment, so they could be good at creating arts too. I would think more with the mridu nakshatras, but sometimes if you get something else being very big, then something smaller can be a support. I have Jupiter in Chitra, the 10th house. So then I did a lot of music. Yeah,
I saw on your Facebook.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I really love like the songs that you composed for your video intros. And the first time I contacted you was like, Oh, will you ever release that song for the Nakshatra series? Because it's so wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I should finish that song and release it. I would love to.
Mm.
I get it always seems like in the good old days I had more time to do things.
Yeah, I guess Saturn was more generous.
Yeah. So yeah, now we took a look at some of my ideas about the artistic
Mhm.
planets, the artistic signs, the artistic nakshatras. If you have combinations of these, it makes a nice artistic thing. But what I really find is the clincher is the houses.
Mm.
Yeah. So as for artistic houses, I think what is art?
The fourth
First of
house.
why would you say that?
Because, Venus has maximum Dikbala in the fourth.
Yeah. Is there anything about the fourth house itself that speaks
It's
to it?
also like a moksha house, right? It's a hidden house.
Yeah.
Mind.
Yeah. It's the very internal self. It's
Mhm.
literally the ground that's below our feet. So it's the inner self. That's where art comes from. That's the birthplace of art, is the emotions. The fourth house is the emotions. Where the moon has an important role to play too,
Yeah.
as the creative birthplace of things. So the fourth house may really not directly be artistic itself, but it's the birthplace of the things that are going to fuel an artist. The
Mhm.
feelings, the emotions, the inner things that they want to get out. What an artist really wants to do is communicate. They want to communicate what they are experiencing inside with other people. They want to share it with other people. So the fourth house is a big central focal point for this. However, the two houses that border the fourth house are the houses that describe how the fourth house has its ability to get out. That's what the artist is trying to do, is to take what's inside and get it out. Well,
Mhm.
that's what the third house and the fifth house are about.
Yes.
Getting the internal things out, figuring out a way to communicate. So the fifth house is all about creativity, third is all about communication.
Hmm. And the third house can also be about musical skills, right?
Yeah,
Like instrumental.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since it's correlated with hands.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all the instruments involve our hands. I think every single instrument involves hands.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the theremin.
Yeah. Yeah. So the third house, and all the skill in playing a musical instrument has to be located in the hands.
Mm-hmm.
So we really want to see skill and dexterity. But if you just have skill and dexterity, but you don't have the rest of the stuff, you might become a technician, you might become an architect. I mean, you might become a builder, you might become a sportsman who you're really good at putting a ball into a hole somewhere,
Yeah.
you know. So that takes a lot of skill, but
Mm-hmm.
it may not be art. But on the other hand, is the fifth house, right?
Yeah.
So the fifth house is,
Creativity.
yeah, really creative. And
Mm.
it's because it's going towards the west. The fifth house goes towards the west, the third goes towards the east relative to the fourth. So the east is tangible and the west is intangible. So the fifth house represents the way that we're taking what's inside of us and making it into something more abstract
Mm-hmm.
that can then be distributed and given to other people. With the third is the opposite. We're taking what's inside of us and we're making it concrete. So that's why it's like skills and ways of manifesting things. But the third house is like, the fifth house on the other hand is like dealing with ideas. It has a lot of ideas. And the fifth house, super important thing about the fifth house, what do you think? It's the house of
Children.
children.
Create. I
All
mean,
right.
yeah, what we create, right?
Right. That's very good.
Yeah.
Children. And also, how do you make children?
Hmm. Are you thinking like it's the house of like sexual affairs, like playfulness, or
It's the house of love.
yeah?
Eighth is like sex, directly sex and reproduction. But fifth is like you make children by making love.
Mm-hmm.
You make love, right? So that makes babies. So the fifth house, it's the love house, because this is the house. The fourth house is the feelings, our emotions. So love is basically a feeling. It starts off as a feeling, but it's a feeling that you express.
Mm-hmm.
to somebody else. So the fifth house is the western side of the fourth house. It's the expression of the self, the inner self, the feelings towards others. So it's very similar with Venus now, like how Venus was the planet of femininity, beauty, love, and also arts. Arts are connected with this. Arts are connected with femininity, beauty, love. They're inseparably connected. And the fifth house being the house of love, it gives us passion, gives us emotional care, concern. We want to we need other people. We want to share with other people. We're driven to communicate. We want to please other people too, right? Artists are trying to make something that other people like or want to connect with.
The fifth
So
is also a Dharma house, right? So it's important for the Dharma path of the individual.
yeah, the fifth house is a Dharma house. Because they have that fire nature to them, fifth, first, and ninth.
Yeah.
The love is the ultimate Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And in the fifth house, you also understand the fifth house, because it's intellect, it allows you to understand the difference between right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The fifth house has many functions. It's got an intellectual function. Like if you just have the fifth house, it doesn't guarantee, if you just have something in the fifth house, it doesn't guarantee that you're a musician by any means. Maybe you're a brilliant scientist. Maybe you have Saturn in some really intelligent sign and really intelligent nakshatra in the fifth house.
Mm-hmm.
Then that fifth house is going to shine in the realm of its intelligence. But what if you have Venus in the fifth house? In a very juicy nakshatra, in a really artistic sign, then it's going to really shine in the artistic way, for example.
Yeah.
But what I see is we got the third house for skills and the fifth house for passion. So what you want to do to see an artist is combine the third and fifth house.
Mm-hmm.
And how you can combine houses is by looking at their lords. You know, that's the basis of many of the yogas, like the Raj yogas and stuff like that. So if you can get the third and fifth lord together in some house, or if you can just at least put the fifth lord in the third house or the third lord in the fifth, if you can make them exchange, that's even better. That's super.
So
Then that's a sign of, that's a hallmark of an artist.
wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would you say, like for singers, the second house would be important for vocal skills?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, vocal singers are a special particular type of musician because they got to use their mouth. That's their instrument.
Yeah,
That's the one, maybe that's the one instrument that doesn't use hands.
exactly.
Yeah. They have to use the mouth, so they have to have the second house. Jupiter would be even more important then, because Jupiter is specifically not just sound, but words and voice.
Mm-hmm.
So Jupiter would be even more important. They also, when you're a singer too, you have to have a lot of some other stuff that may not look like artsy. And here it would be interesting to talk about the difference between an artist and a popular artist.
Yeah.
Or an artist and an artist that you know about.
Mm-hmm.
Because speaking as a musician, most of the artists that are popular are not very good musicians. And most of the, there's a lot of great musicians that hardly ever play their instruments and aren't well known and things like that. Because it's just not really a world. It's not really a world that's designed to support Venus. Kali Yuga is designed to support Mars. And Venus things become very difficult to flourish. Love, marriage, arts, beauty. It's becoming more difficult to make that flourish in this epoch of history. So you see, so it's interesting to see what's the difference between somebody who has artistic talents versus a person who's really able to have an artistic career, be known as an artist. So you mix in a couple of elements that maybe don't have anything to do with art. Like they have to be very self-confident. They can't be self-conscious, and they can't be so shy that they won't take the stage. But there's a challenge there because they have to have, most of the stuff is the underground houses. They have to have fourth house fueling the fifth and the third connected. So they have to be very emotional people in order to be an artist in the first place. But all that emotional stuff is also the underground, which means shy. That's why artists usually, there's two reasons why artists resort to drugs often. I'll say, actually, maybe I'll give you three. One is because the stress of being an artist, but being on stage is so extreme. Because by being an artist, you're very self-conscious, actually. You're very introverted by the virtue of the fact that you're an artist. So it's actually really stressful for artists to put themselves on stage often. The other reason why they use drugs a lot, and you won't know this unless you have been an artist as a career, is it's incredibly boring.
Wow, because it's repetitive?
80% of the time being a performing artist is incredibly boring because you only perform for like an hour. And then you have like all this other waiting time associated with it and travel time associated with it, all this other boring stuff just to perform for an hour. So there's a lot of downtime as a musician. So number one, you have a lot of neurosis because you're like introverted, but yet you're showing yourself to everyone. Number two, you have a lot of time to think about your neurosis because there's a lot of downtime. And the third thing too is because drugs help the imagination, and musicians like imagination.
Yeah.
So if, however, you can give a musician something like a strong sun or some kind of authority, nakshatra, or maybe a strong Mars, some kind of confidence through it, whether through, by combining a male planet. See, like we get femininity is going to give us the actual content and the beauty of the art, but we need the masculinity element to bring the confidence to be able to go out and show the world who we are and perform our stuff. So known musicians will usually also have something like a phenomenal sun, a very strong Mars, but usually tucked out of the way, usually out of the way of their feminine planets. They should have their feminine stuff strong and not in confliction with the masculine stuff. They should both be strong independently. When you conflict masculine and feminine symbols, it doesn't do well.
So because you mentioned the sun a little, the sun is like our inspiration, pursuing our inspiration. Shouldn't that be important for all artists, not just like more famous ones,
I don't think of the sun as our inspiration.
It's like pursuing it, like pursuing your inspiration.
Right. Sun is our confidence. So sun is the Atma, and it's the stability, the stabilizer. It's the prominent masculine force, which is confident and strong and stable. So it would give you strength to be able to pursue something that you want, but it wouldn't indicate your inspiration. Moon is inspiration for me. How I think of things is moon is manas. Manas is mind, and the mind contains all of your kama, your desires, and kama is the inspiration for everything. So, let's get that. That's why fundamental Vedic astrology is so happy to just contain itself to moon and sun.
Yeah.
Fundamental Jyotish, old Vedanga Jyotish, is just like they don't care about 5 other planets, 7 other planets. They could just do everything they want to do just by looking at the sun and moon. Because if you think about it, you have everything with the sun and moon. The masculinity, the femininity is both there. So, yeah, you could still, let's put the moon in Rohini and the sun in Leo. So this person's got a lot of creative juice from the moon in Rohini, and they've got a lot of confidence from the sun in Leo. So rather than defining techniques, which would limit us to like only looking for those techniques, I'd like to look at principles and then keep my mind open to what could be similar to this principle. Because there's so many possible ways to get from point A to point B that if we just define one way to get there, we'll probably miss all the other ways.
Yeah. In your video about the artist formerly known as the artist, known as Prince, you were overlying, the Navamsha with the Saptamsha. I thought that was like really interesting. Why did you choose the Navamsha and the Saptamsha? I have an idea, but I would like you to tell us.
Well, the reason why I chose the Saptamsha is very clear, right? Because Saptamsha is another angle to look at the fifth house.
Mm.
It might not be clear from the numbering of the things.
Mm-hmm.
The Sapta means 7, so why isn't it the 7th house? But it's not always that the divisional size corresponds to the house. But Saptamsha is about all the things that the fifth house are about, which means passion, love, creativity, babies, stuff like that. So it's just like if I just say, hey, the fifth house is important for an artist, that can just be a shorthand, which means anything else about the fifth house. Like fifth house from the moon, fifth house from the sun, fifth house in the Amsha charts, which would be the Saptamsha. And this technique of overlaying is just super interesting because it's easy to do it with a computer. It would be really hard to do it by pencil. To say, like, well, you can say Venus is in Gemini Navamsha, but to know the degree of Gemini Navamsha by calculating by hand, it's really tedious. But with computers, it's no sweat.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually see the degree that Venus is at in a Navamsha or in a Saptamsha, and then you can compare that. The basic principle is Vargotama and things like that.
Yeah.
So and I've seen this in other yogas. I probably couldn't recall any off the top of my head where they'll say if the planet is in such and such Navamsha, and then that Navamsha is such and such house in the main chart. They go back and forth between the Amsha and the main chart. So that gave me the idea that, well, the Navamsha correlates to the main chart.
Mm-hmm.
Then I just tinkered. Because I had a computer and I had a program that let me overlay the Saptamshas and the Amsha charts over the Rashi charts. So I just tried it. And then the things that I saw were pretty compelling. I get a lot of charts of very outstanding people. There's a lot of outstanding combinations, but in charts of ordinary people, there's not a lot of outstanding conjunctions, you can say, between the Amsha chart and the Rashi chart.
Yeah, it's kind of a synastry between the chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Between the Amsha and the Rashi. And Navamsha, why did you think I used the Navamsha?
Because that's the fulfillment of one's path, right?
Yeah. My understanding of Navamsha is it's like the 9th house.
Yeah.
So the 9th house is about Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Dharma doesn't just mean your religions, but like this thing with the Dharma trine, 5 and everything.
Yeah.
Dharma means the nature of who you are. The nature of what or who something is its Dharma. And then if you are true to that Dharma, then that's not sinful. That's good. You're in alignment with who and what you are. If you're out of alignment with who and what you are, that means you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's like saying you're sinful. So that's where it has a religious connotation.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual meaning of the word Dharma is, what are you?
Yeah.
So that's why Navamsha is so important for anything. And the 9th house is so important for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because what are you affects everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people think Navamsha is about marriage. That's because marriage is one of the only religious functions that people care about, that people even observe. So because Dharma has to do with religion, and because marriage also has to do with religion, then Navamsha is also important for marriage, but it's primarily about the person's Dharma. So if you see like a rising Venus in a Navamsha, a rising exalted Venus in a Navamsha, this person must think of themselves as a beautiful person, an artistically creative person, a loving person, something that has to do with Venus, because that's how they must be conceiving of their Dharma, their nature. And they won't feel satisfied until they're in, the nature of Dharma is you can try to not be what you are, but it's a lot of work. It's much easier to be what you are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're out of sync with your Dharma, you don't feel satisfied. You keep wondering, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
So people tend to try to go and try to be what the Navamsha looks like, because that's the Dharma. It's pulling them to be that way. So a person with like a really artistic looking Navamsha, maybe the Rashi is not so artistic. You might not see it in the Rashi, but if the Navamsha is really artistic.
So you give prevalence to the Navamsha over the Rashi, right?
No, I don't give prevalence to the Navamsha over the Rashi. You can never do that.
Okay.
because the nature, what is an amsha? It's a part.
Yeah.
So the part can never be more prominent than the thing it's a part of. But this part can be pretty darn important. It can be a real important part. So the navamsha is a real important part. Any amsha is really important for the thing that it signifies. But amshas like 9 and 60, which signify everything, are pretty darn important for everything. So if you see a really artistic navamsha, but you actually absolutely see no artistic indications in the main chart, then sorry, it must mean something else. They're not artistic. Maybe they're just pretty. Or maybe they're just very loving or something. But if there's something in the main chart, what I meant by the main chart is not artistic. It's like, it's not really screaming to you, here's Prince.
Yeah.
Or here, here's Mozart. But here's a couple of things that look like he's a pretty artistic person. The navamsha, if the navamsha is stellar screaming, here's Mozart, here's Beethoven, here's a Prince, then the navamsha can use those things that are in the main chart.
Interesting. But you know what I have noticed, there are like artists with debilitated Jupiter or debilitated Venus in the navamsha or in the Rashi as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the dignity does not necessarily make or break being an artist.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing as my particular approach. Like, I don't want to be too technique oriented. So never just say like, dignity is all important or dignity is not important. Dignity is one of the things that you should think about. I'll use myself as an example because I'm an artist whose chart I know. So I have a debilitated Venus. Venus is in Virgo, in the 9th house with Ketu. And furthermore, the way that Parashar Horashastra teaches us to think about dignity is not to just look at the Rashi, but to do something that he calls the Varga dignity, the Varga Vimshopaka. You got 20-point Varga, a 20-point score system for assessing dignity, considering the Vargas too, not just the Rashi. So maybe somebody's got a Venus in Virgo, but maybe it's in Taurus, Navamsha, and Libra Saptamsha. And maybe it's got fantastic dignity overall. Maybe it can have really high dignity, but planets can have really great dignity even though they're in their debilitation sign. That's where you scratch your head and you try to invent rules like Nich Banga, the cancellation of debilitation. And similarly, you can have a planet that's in its exaltation sign, but when you think about all the Vargas that it's in, it has really lousy dignity, and you scratch your head and you try to come up with like a Uchai Banga, like a breaking of the exaltation. Where it's actually just simple. Parashar says, look at the dignity overall, not just in the thing, in the Rashi chart. So even if you have a debilitated planet, also we need to have our facts clear about, like, our theory clear, like, what does debilitation mean? It means this planet becomes needy. It's not able to really do what it wants to do. It needs help. Maybe it gets that help. And that's the concept of Nichbang Raj Yoga. This is a debilitated planet that's getting what it needs and therefore like overcoming its problems. Well, I could see something similar like that. Like, what if you have, like, I have Venus debilitated, but it's in the 9th house. Venus is great in the 9th house, and it's with Ketu. That means it's a Raj Yoga. A planet in the 9th house, I'm sorry, because I have a Capricorn ascendant. Or you could just figure that out from it being in Virgo. That must be the Yogakark planet. So if you put a owner of a Kendra in a Kona with a node, that is outstanding. It's called a Raja Yoga. So here's a debilitated
your
planet,
Venus is delighted by Mercury, so
is it?
Because it's in Virgo, right?
Yeah, so I don't know about that stuff. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, because if a planet is debilitated in a friend sign, the friend will still help the planet, right? So it's not so unhappy, as if it were debilitated in an enemy sign like the Sun or Saturn, right? Because when you're like Venus is debilitated in a friend sign, it gets something else to do. It appeals to mercurial things to find things to do when it's unsatisfied, right? So it finds another hobby, another passion, so the person is still satisfied, you know.
Does it matter where Mercury is in relation to Venus?
No, I mean, it matters to see in the Avashta's chart how much it's delighting Venus.
Oh.
But it's still gonna be delighting. It's in its sign, right?
Yeah, I like that whole idea that my Venus is delighted by Mercury.
Yes.
Yeah. So what were we talking about?
We were talking about the yogas, because you have a Capricorn ascendant. You know,
Yeah.
Venus is a yoga karaka,
So
and
you might see sorry. So you might see an artist with like a debilitated Jupiter or a debilitated Venus, but debilitation isn't the only thing to think about.
Yeah.
In fact, oftentimes if a planet is debilitated, it's like more in a position of calling attention to it or something. In certain conditions, debilitation can work out to be something really outstanding.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't mention, that I should have mentioned before, when I was getting to talk about the difference between people who have artistic skill versus the people that actually get to be known for their art or get to perform their art, I started talking about how you need some masculine elements, symbolic masculine elements. So the bottom half of the sky is symbolically feminine. It's all underground and internal, and it's the earth. The upper part of the sky, the visible, airy sky, is symbolically masculine. So we got to also get the third and the fifth lord to do something with these lords from up above. Especially, there's one of those houses up there that likes art. And it's the 11th.
A Kama house.
It's a Kama house. It loves art. It's Labha. It wants to get stuff. And it's the house where you enjoy life. The 11th house contains all of the beautiful objects. Money, treasures, jewels,
Awards.
Good food, good words, poems.
Music awards.
Music. Oh, awards.
Yeah.
Good music, good dance. Everything is performed in the 11th house. It's not created in the 11th house, but it's performed in the 11th house. It can be enjoyed in the 11th house. So the thing that I've noticed in plenty of musicians, maybe 80%, is 3, 5, and 11. Combinations between those houses and lords, especially if they're also artistic planets. So, for example, third and the 11th, actually this is confirmed in classic texts. Classic texts have something like, say stuff like third lord in the 11th house is a dancer. Yeah. Third and the 11th, 11th, third, make a house exchange between 11 and 3, so nice. And put the fifth lord somewhere in there, or make the fifth lord prominent, or do something nice with the fifth house. Some way or another, make the 3rd, 11th, and 5th shine in the chart and get them to connect to each other. And you have people who not only have a lot of creative passion, they have some skill to manifest it, and they have some confidence and opportunity. They get a stage. The 11th house gives them the stage and lets them get up on the stage.
Yeah. I was, while you were talking about the debilitated planets, I was thinking about, the moon, when it's debilitated in the first 3 degrees, and the Navamsha, it will always be in Cancer, right? So that says something, it's like you can't dismiss it, because so many musicians have debilitated moon in the Rashi charts. And what I wanted to say, do you think like the caste matters? Like for instance, the moon is Vaishya, the sun is Kshatriya. I mean, do you think like the Brahmin planets, like Venus and Jupiter, have a higher importance than the other planets? Because you said like Mercury can also contribute, and Mercury is Vaishya as well as the moon. And do you think like the Brahmin? I mean, the arts are like a Brahmin realm, and people who have I'm just gonna go to an extreme, people who have like a Saturn Atmakaraka are like not to perform arts. Some people say that in the comments, oh my god, my Atmakaraka is Saturn, can I be an artist?
Yeah, I would say definitely that caste is a very helpful. Caste is an English translation, which is actually should be Varna. The caste system is actually different than Varna.
Yeah.
Varna means your color, like
Mm.
of what type of a thing you are is called a Varna. Caste is something that's jati, it's by birth. Is a whole the perversion of the Varna system in India over the centuries became the caste system.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the words were maintained, like words like Brahmana, Vaishya, and all that stuff. But planets have Varnas, which means what type of a person is this? What type of a planet? What type of a person does this planet symbolize? Jupiter and Venus are Brahmana Varnas. So they symbolize people who are thoughtful, have a lot of knowledge, have a lot of talent, learn things. And arts, I mean, even as recently as 200 or 100 years ago, universities were teaching arts
Mm-hmm.
and sciences. That's what you would go to study. If you just don't go to school, then you learn how to be a farmer or something.
Yeah.
But if you're going to learn how to play a lute or you play a guitar or something, you're going to have to go take lessons. You have to
Mm-hmm.
study what music, especially if you're going to do it with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Play with other people, you have to all be on the same page about what you're doing. So you have to have a common body of knowledge. So musicians and artists are brahmanas. But it's not that there's not other aspects to music that aren't Brahminical. Like you need confidence. So a planet like Sun or Mars, who's a Kshatriya type,
Mm-hmm.
confident type, would be helpful as a support. You need some kind of fertility. Like Vaishya is actually not just business, but fertility. They produce resources.
Mm.
And that's what the word Vaishya means. It comes from the word Vishya. And Vishaya means an object of wealth, an object of beauty. Vaishyas make objects of wealth. So artistry has a lot to do with Vaishya too.
Mm-hmm.
So those two planets, Mercury and the Moon, give a productive or fertile nature to. That's really, really important. Like, there's different kinds of musicians too. This could be easy to find. This could be interesting to fine tune. There's some musicians that are like fountains of music.
Yeah.
They just prolifically create music all the time. And then there's other musicians that they're usually really dry, but then after 3 years they make a great song, and then they can't make anything good again. And then after another 5 years they make another great, super great song. There's different types. Not all musicians are really fertile. Probably the musicians that are more fertile have a lot more Vaishya symbolism going in their chart, because they can produce a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Shudra also has something to do with it. Do you know what the etymology of the word Shudra is?
No.
It's connected with the word Shrava, which means to listen. Shudras listen. They don't really have their own. The nature of a Shudra is they don't really have their own ambitions or enough courage to follow their own ambitions. So they would rather prefer somebody to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can do that. And they can, right? So that's the nature of a Shudra, is they like to follow instructions.
Mm-hmm.
So the Shudra is named that way because they're the listener. They're the one who listens. The listening can be important. And the other characteristic of Shudra is they usually do things that are easy to do.
Repetitive. And
yeah, I can tell you how to do this, and then you just go do
mm-hmm.
it. That's a Shudra. So they tend to do things that are a lot like manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
So they also, actually, if you go into Indian history and look at how the arts have been regarded, in recent centuries, artists all of a sudden became denigrated
Mm-hmm.
and called Shudra. Mm-hmm. And the legitimization for that was you guys are working with your hands. So you guys are just like the Shudras that just lay bricks, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world, because it couldn't be a bigger difference between laying a brick and playing a violin. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different use of the hands. But for some reason, some curse or something, the whole concept of an artist in India became, the whole concept of women, the whole concept of beauty, the whole concept of art, which used to be held in the highest regard in Vedic culture, became crushed in India herself, as a result, probably mostly of being conquered
by the Muslims
and a bit by the British. And so India is complicated because they never converted.
Yeah.
Right? They never converted.
Officially.
Officially. In a sense, it would have been easier if they converted. Then we would be able to tell the converts from the original culture, but because India maintained its Hinduism but just adapted to the invaders, it's like it changed its
Yeah.
culture to kind of fit with the new influences. So it's a little more insidious and hard to sort it out. Which one is the original form? Which one is the permutation?
So India was like a lunar culture because it adapted, it was receptive to what it received, right?
Yeah, right?
Mhm.
If she wasn't of primarily feminine nature, she wouldn't have even done that.
Yeah.
So India was actually primarily a very Venus-like place. But then it's the nature of this whole yuga
Mhm.
is not to support Venus. Has that been good? Interesting?
Very interesting. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, I know this is like a very broad topic and it could like go into its own video, but what do you think like the placements of Rahu and Ketu in a musician's chart, how can it help? Or because of course some Ketu with some musical career factors would show like past life influence, and Rahu with some musical factors might amplify them, right, and bring them to
Yeah.
the center of the stage and give them more confidence. Can you talk a bit about that?
That was my primary thought, that last thing that you
Mm-hmm.
said. Because the Rahu Ketu don't symbolize anything particularly on their own. They symbolize the amplification and exaggeration and
Mm-hmm.
evolution of things, but it's not specified what things.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything. They just, Rahu Ketu are just interested in changing things and exaggerating things and making things bigger. Rahu bigger, Ketu more intense.
Mm-hmm.
So it entirely depends on what Rahu is affected by, what Ketu is affected by. So therefore, they can exaggerate or amplify anything that you're looking at. If you want to look at wealth, well, you'll pick up all your rules for figuring out wealth. Let's see the Vaishya planets. Let's see the houses like 2 and 11, and maybe 6 and 8 and 12. And then if you put Rahu on there, that will just that may magnify it, kick it up over the. It doesn't add a new thing to add Rahu in there. It just says, wow, this is getting really blown up. Yeah,
Yeah.
really emphasized. So yeah, and Rahu can also show the person who really changes things. If you just take Rahu raw, that's the nature of Rahu, is just to change things.
Mm-hmm.
So in certain forms of music, like rock and roll or punk rock, or like musical styles that are revolutionary
Mm-hmm.
and change the society, then you probably find Rahu and Ketu prominent in those particular types of musicians. Whereas if you just, a musician at Lincoln Center in New York City, they probably don't have Rahu Ketu at all. But a musician like Sid Vicious or somebody's probably
Yeah.
like got tons of Rahu Ketu.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Beatles, they were phenomenally revolutionary. They revolutionized tons of stuff about music.
Mm-hmm.
They were early rock musicians. And a lot of those people, a lot of the Beatles have a lot of Rahu Ketu close to their ascendant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much for answering that. And I think we will get to the end of our interview because I know you have things to do. But again, thank you very much for joining me. This is always a fascinating topic and could be talked about, I'm sure, for hours and hours.
Yeah.
If you want to see more about Vic's videos, you can visit his website, vicdicara.com, or his YouTube with the same name. And if you're curious about my study on musicians, I'm going to link it down below as well. So
Great.
thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now.